It's not uncommon to see conflict situations escalate, whether it's an argument with your partner or a business situation, or even a situation where it's more physical conflict involved. But what if there's a way that you could de-escalate that even further to diffuse that before it even happens? What if there was a way you could adjust what you're doing so that the conflict doesn't arise in the first place? Listen to Craig Gray as he talks about this process and how to avoid conflicts even starting at all.
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. And today, it's my great pleasure to welcome Craig Gray. For over 2 decades, Craig has provided expert advice in conflict management, leadership, and defensive tactics to private and government organizations. He's a successful entrepreneur, black belt instructor in Krav Maga, and an associate at Resolution Group International. Craig helps people communicate more clearly, learn more effectively, and defend themselves more confidently. Welcome, Craig.
Hey, I really appreciate you having me on your show today.
It's a great pleasure to have you here. Craig, do you want to start? If we can jump in the Wayback Machine, remember that DeLorean from Back to the Future? Can we jump in that and, hit 88 miles an hour and just go back to, some times where something from your background or things from your background that affected you, challenges that you had to face that led to what you're doing now?
Well, we'll go way back in the DeLorean there to when I was just a little sprout, and actually this whole journey started with my brother and I. My brother is several years older than I was, or I am, I should say. And he was a bully as a kid would be an understatement, and he was an overachiever when it came to handing it to me. And that was really my dad was a Marine.
Yeah.
So
toughen up.
Yeah, toughen up, right? And my dad was also a martial artist when he was younger. He trained when he was stationed over in the Philippines and Okinawa.
Yeah.
And back in those days, I mean, this is, I'm 52 right now, depending on when your listeners are listening to this. But
so what year?
Hopefully this will be out there for
as well, so I can relate to that era and what it was like. Yes.
So this, I was very young, and my mom and dad wanted me to grow and prosper as a young man. Yeah. And my dad started me in martial arts when I was just a kid. I mean, literally 6 years old. Started me in the basement to, as sad as it may sound, to defend myself from my brother.
Yes.
And so that's kind of where it started for me. And I learned very young to be able to stand up for myself. And it's also, all joking aside, my brother had some emotional and mental issues and so forth that he had to contend with. And for the longest time when I was young, I was the brunt end of a lot of that.
Yeah.
And then I got a little bit larger as I grew up into a young man. And, I'd been training in the martial arts for several years by that time. My dad started me in the basement, and then I went to a professional school shortly thereafter. Those were in the days before Karate Kid and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and all of that. Were basically they're adult classes, so they didn't really have kids classes in those days. You either worked in with the adults or you didn't go.
Yeah.
And I was a little bigger for my age. My dad had started me training already, and so I got better at the martial arts. And time went by, years went by, and I finally was able to stand up to my brother. And he never picked on me or hurt me again after that little altercation that he and I had had. And that kind of stemmed the journey both for myself and obviously as a young man. I think there's a lot of young guys out there and young at heart guys who there's an allure to the martial arts.
Yeah.
For many reasons. So some part of it for me was that allure of, just being a young guy. And then part of it was this idea of being in charge of your own life, having the confidence in yourself and the ability to stand up for what's right, both for you, but also for other people, being able to stand up for other people.
Yeah.
And what I saw was that journey that I had gone through at a very young age. I saw other people who wanted to empower their lives. So for the longest time, for me, the martial arts kind of was a vehicle to help both myself and other people really gain that confidence and that perspective to be a force for good, so to speak. And then as time went on, I got into the security work, executive protection. I was a bodyguard for quite a long time. And did a stint in corporate America. So all those experiences together kind of culminated into getting hired by police departments in that when I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
So I run academy. I still run an academy. So the kind of three things that I do. One is I travel around and I teach conflict management and leadership skills to police departments and military and some corporate stuff and teachers and hospitals and that type of thing. Yeah. And then by night, I teach martial arts at the academy. I teach Krav Maga, which is an Israeli form of self-defense. Yeah. And then there's an online learning center that I run as well called PeaceWalker.net. And so those are kind of the three things that keep me busy. And what I found early on is I would get some students that were from all walks of life, but at the times, probably, I don't know, early 90s probably. And I had some police officers that were students, and they would come to me at night and say, well, Craig, this is what I ran into the other day. This guy was resisting arrest. This guy was being a knucklehead. What would you do? So we started putting together scenarios. And at first it was just the physical stuff. Yeah. And as time went on, I started going in on ride-alongs, and with my security details and that with executive protection, I would sometimes do work with police officers and a couple military stints as well. And, I got to kind of know what they did and was able to help them out in some of the ways that they were needing, especially in those times, which what we figured out pretty quick was it wasn't just the physical elements. Yeah. It was really, how did you manage conflict inside of you? And then did you have the tools to manage the conflict around you, starting with this ethic of being a protector of life, and being able to separate someone's value as a human being from their behaviors that you may have to manage. And I really have to credit that with my brother, right? So, and I couldn't have articulated it at the time because I was a young man, but now the 52-year-old Craig, looking back at that young man dealing with his brother who was abusive, I loved my brother. Yeah, I loved him, but I also didn't want to be victimized. Yes. So and I had to figure out what to do when nice didn't work. What do you do when are you verbalizing your boundaries? Are their boundaries reasonable for everybody? And what happens if that boundary isn't respected? What do you do? It's not really about forcing the other person to do what you want, but it's like, well, what are your choices if if your boundaries aren't respected? So it always starts with that idea of the life value, the value of life, the sanctity of life, of self and others, and not just others. Well, there's you, obviously, and a lot of people come to me to learn how to protect themselves, self-defense. But I always ask this question of folks, and I'll ask it of you and your listeners. So you'd probably protect yourself if you had to. Well, and I don't mean just physically, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you eat and breathe, believe it or not, you're protecting yourself, right? You get a career so you can make money, so you can keep a roof over your head and food in your belly. Then is there anybody in your life that you would protect? And if you're a parent, the answer is obvious, right?
Yes.
But even if you're not a parent, like you, I've traveled a fair amount around the world doing what I love to do, my business and my passion, and also some little R&R in there when I can fit it in. But I ask this question a lot to people, and no matter where I go, what country I'm in, what religion you practice, what language you speak, what background, what's your ethnicity, everybody always has someone that they would protect.
Yeah.
And then the next question I often ask is, would you put yourself in harm's way to protect that person that you're thinking about? And I don't know anybody I shouldn't say I don't know anybody, but the majority of the people would say yes. Obviously, there's somebody that I would protect over myself. So I argue the point that our identity as a protector is second only to our identity as a human being. That is my argument. So getting back to that and understanding that everyone is protecting something, we just have to make sure it's the right things. And if you can clarify that and have the skills and tools to act on that more effectively, you are going to be able to mitigate conflict better. You're going to be able to protect yourself and other people better, make better decisions, and ultimately live a better life.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing there as well, and I'm going to relate that to is you're saying we have an innate need to protect people, and as much as it probably doesn't appear like it really is manifested a lot today. And I'll come back to what was your driver or what was your realization to that, because there was two things I was thinking of when you were saying that. Was one, I was listening to a comedian, and the comedian was talking about how in their life they get all these people coming to the defense of other people. In a sense, in a show he was doing, there was a blind person in the show, and he was making some jokes and making the blind person inclusive of the show. Now, somebody jumped up and was getting really defensive of, how dare you, do that
Pick
to
on
the
this blind person.
Yeah. And the blind person actually came up to him afterwards and said, I really appreciate that, because normally people ignore me and put me to the side and don't want to say anything. But what I'm getting to the point of that was this person who did not know this blind person at all immediately came to the defense of it. And if you look at the internet, and maybe it's not done in an effective way, which is partly what you teach, well, largely what I'd say you teach, is you look at the internet, there's a lot of people coming to the defense of other people. Someone will post something, and how dare you post that about so-and-so or whatever. So it seems to be that there is this great need to protect other people. When was your realization? Obviously you had from your brother, your dad taught you from a young age some martial arts to protect yourself, and you were protecting yourself. What was that realization like, and when was that realization, if you remember, that I'm actually want to protect other people as well? Because that's a different step to realize, to have that real. I think innately people do that, but to actually have that realization to do that. What was that like? And do you want to talk about that?
Sure. My brother, as we talked about a little bit earlier, my brother was that first idea of protecting myself, and probably I didn't really realize that at the time, or I couldn't articulate it in quite this clear of a way, but I felt bad for my brother. I saw my brother struggle with things, and I didn't want really harm to come to him. I wanted to be left alone, but I also saw him as a human being, and probably because we were brothers, and there's a lot of him that I loved and respected as an older brother. but yet I didn't want to be the brunt of the abuse.
Yeah.
So it started. So again, I wouldn't have been able to really articulate that at the time, but I could clearly separate his value as a human being
Mm.
from his behavior.
Yeah.
You know, where it's harder to do that when you're when there's more differences, right? When you believe in different things relatively, like political or religion or socioeconomics or whatever it is, or you look differently. You got two white bald guys here talking. We, aside from our accents, we look like we could be almost the same person. I'll put some glasses on and talk with a cool accent.
Exactly.
So that's easier. It's harder when the people look different than you, and there's a certain amount of fear of that differentiation.
Yeah. Okay.
So I realized that portion of it early on, and it took me longer time to clarify that. And I had some help too, and I'm probably will get into that a little bit. So with some of my mentors to help clarify that.
Yeah.
But that's where it started, and where I first started to extend that, I think, to others, aside from my brother, really was my friends at a very young age too, because I was a little bigger for my age, and starting in martial arts at 6 years old. By the time I was even a little bit older in school, my friends all pretty much knew that I took martial arts, and I was a little bigger, and I was very much an independent guy. I wasn't in the in group, but I wasn't the outcasts either.
Yeah.
Because my brother kind of trained me well, so to speak. Nobody really picked on me.
Yeah.
And he always protected me from the older kids. So I didn't really have anybody who tested me, but they would test some of my friends. And some of my first memories of protecting other people were protecting my friends at a very young age.
Yeah. So what was it, the desire to protect, when you looked at, you're saying your friends are being, so these are my friends, and someone outside of that is hurting them. I'm being, I'm saying paraphrase, but it's not. I'm just being very broad in the description. So you're going, okay, these are my friends. I've got the ability to protect them. I think this is wrong, and I'm going to protect them and stand up for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had I had a visceral reaction to it, because I knew what it was like to be humiliated, to be traumatized, to be more than just bullied, but that feeling of not being a power, the feeling of humiliation, especially when it was done, or if it's done in front of other people. So I responded in a way to help protect them. But here's the interesting thing, and I don't know how this part happened, other than my parents at the time teaching me this, and my grandparents teaching me, and my first martial arts instructors. But I would never retaliate against let's say the aggressor, more than what was necessary to keep everybody safe.
Yeah.
And going back to your comment about the online nowadays. So nowadays, I would call it neo-tribalism. So we have tribed up, and if you speak ill against my group and my tribe, I'm going to attack you.
Yes.
And sometimes I will defend my tribe and my group, even if we're wrong, but just because it's my group, everything that you do in your group is wrong, and everything that we do is right.
Yes.
And it becomes a war. And for some reason, from the origins of my kind of protector identity, I never had that so much, to be honest. And I think that came from my parents and some of my my grandparents, my parents, and my early martial arts teachers, teaching to be fair and kind to everybody.
Yeah.
And if you need to protect somebody or something, it better be for the right reasons, and you don't go beyond that to attack the other person. To see, my grandmother was a huge influence on me, and we grew up right around the corner from her and my grandfather, so we were over there a lot, sometimes more so than my own folks' home. And my grandma was a wonderful woman, and she loved everybody, and she was probably about 4'9", and maybe as wide. She gave the greatest
and I can
hugs.
imagine she was his powerhouse too. So
but she was always happy, always happy.
Yeah.
And she dealt with conflict with this sense of kind of grace under pressure and joy. You could tell that it made her a little uncomfortable, but she always went in a loving way.
Yes.
We
might have had the same grandmother, because my grandmother's quote on my dad's side was always, "I no complain," and she was just always this picture of peace and, like you say, dealt with this conflict with grace.
Yeah, and she was always so joyful. And one day she and I hung out, right? And she passed away when I was probably 23.
Right.
And at that time, when I started bartending when I was in college, and I bartended for several years, and I'd go over there sometimes after my shift was so I was still living with my folks at that point in time, and she lived right around the corner. So she was a night owl, right? So she would stay up until like 2:00 in the morning and get up at like 10. So sometimes if I had an early shift, I'd go by her house and we would play gin rummy.
Oh, cool.
We would just talk.
Yeah.
And one time I remember asking her, I said, "Grandma, how do you do it?" And she's like, "What do you mean? How do I do what?" It's like, it's like you love people all the time and you're very joyful about things. And she said, "Craig, you just have to understand that people are just people, and they come with baggage, with the good, the bad, the ugly, and all this, and you just have to see the good in people." And she didn't overcomplicate it, and it wasn't some big religious dissertation, and it wasn't some big psychological, analysis or anything. She just said, "Craig, you just have to look for the good in people."
Yeah.
And later on, I don't know do you guys know who Mr. Rogers is? Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood?
I've heard of it. Don't know it that well, but yeah. So
it was a huge show here in the States for decades, and I remember growing up. It started like in the late '60s, and then Fred Rogers is the guy's name, and then I think it ended.
Know of it. So yeah.
So it was a kids show, right? Yeah. And he had it was
Roy
all
Rogers? No.
No, that would be a different show, right? They had the Roy Rogers show, but that would be earlier in different format.
Okay.
But Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was the name of the show.
Right.
And it was about kids, basically showing good morals and ethics to kids and how to work through conflicts and all that through, it was a kids show. So it's like puppets and traits and, all this for little kids.
Yeah.
But it went on for years. And what inspired him to do that show was when he was a kid, I guess he got freaked out watching the news with all the negativity and sometimes the violence and that type of thing. And he asked his mom about it, and his mom said, "Fred, always look for the people who are helping." She said, anytime there's conflict and violence, there's always going to be somebody who's helping.
Yeah.
But look to those people. And that really inspired him to do all that work and create that show years later, to be that person who's the helper, right? Yeah. So same thing, I think, with my mission with the PeaceWalker project is to be that person, be that force for good.
Yeah.
I use this analogy a lot. Maybe you'll appreciate it. As being that, you live on a big island that's surrounded by water, right?
Yeah.
And on the beaches, I'm sure you have lifeguards.
Yes.
Now,
not to protect the people, but to stop them going to the sharks. No.
Yeah, I was saying, watch out for the big great whites out there.
Well, we know how we done. We fed a prime minister to one, so it's all politicians.
The sharks in the suits.
Exactly.
But you have, if you come into this idea of a lifeguard versus an Olympic swimmer, they both have to be strong swimmers.
Yes.
But their training is different. What their objective and their mission is different, right? So when I teach people to be better protectors, let's say they come into the martial arts academy, or I go and I'm training defensive tactics with enforcement or something, or going to a hospital to train the security team or something. This idea of the physical encounter we get fixated on. to be a fighter, right? To learn martial arts or whatever, so you can fight.
Yeah.
And I use the analogy, it's like, well, it's kind of like the difference between an Olympic swimmer and a lifeguard, right? They both have to swim, but they do it for very different reasons.
Yeah.
Now, there's nothing wrong with the Olympic swimmer. You want to be the fastest in the pool, and you're probably younger, very strong. You're the best of the best, and you train very hard in a very particular way to be the fastest swimmer in the world.
Yes.
The training is different, though, than that of a lifeguard. So a lifeguard also has to be a very strong swimmer.
Yes.
However, that's not their job to be the fastest in the pool. Their job is to protect the lives of other people. But you have to be a strong swimmer to do so.
Yes.
And beyond that, you have to do more things than just swim, right? The lifeguard has got to be good at treading water while having someone else in their care. CPR and first aid. You've got to be a leader to be able to be a good communicator, to probably work small watercrafts, to understand the weather conditions. You have to have all these other skills, and being a swimmer is just one aspect of that. It's a important aspect, but it's only one aspect.
Yeah.
So the same thing if you're learning defensive tactics, if you're law enforcement, military, security personnel, or if you're a martial artist. Defensive tactics and the physical portion of conflict management and being a better protector is only one aspect of it.
Yeah.
And I would say it's the alpha and the omega. The alpha meaning the beginning. If you are confident in your ability to protect yourself, that confidence goes into everything that you do. It's in how you walk and how you talk and how your ability to remain baseline, to remain cool and calm under pressure. And then, so that's the beginning. And it's the omega because it's the ending, meaning it's your last resort. If you have to physically protect yourself or someone else, that you feel confident that you have the skills to do so, which gives you other options to be able to protect and have a wider capacity to do it at a lower level, right? The force continuum.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you're afraid, if that response comes out of fear, unfortunately, you either over respond or you under respond. Oftentimes, right? You freeze, or maybe you overreact, and then you get excessive force issues and things like this.
Yeah. I want to come back to what you mentioned before, and because again, this need to protect, because you talked about this visceral reaction when your friends were being bullied, and you wanted to protect them. And I'm thinking about, as you were talking about that, I was thinking, from the perspective, we look at, the world today, we seem to be more and more defining and creating different groups. But if we start high up, we have people, and then you've got, there's male and female, and then there's another groups within that we've now got defined as well. And then we go down, and people then have all these different identities. And do you think maybe this, because it seems that no matter who we are, we have this visceral need to protect our group. And I'll liken it a close friend of mine is similar to what you do. He's also a black belt, and he works with the police and troubled youth and adults, both victims and perpetrators. And there was one school that we had where there was very bad issues with two gangs that were conflict against each other. And what he did was he said, he told the principal to send the leader of one gang to a room, and told the vice principal to send the leader of the other gang to a room. He didn't tell them that it was the same room. And
surprise.
Exactly. So these guys turned up, and he was there. And similar to yourself, he's 7th Dan black belt. He's well built, and so they weren't leaving this room. And he made them have a discussion, and they talked about it, and they found this common ground. And the irony of that was, a week later, the dad of one of the gang members died. The first person at the door of the other gang member's house was the leader of that gang member saying, "How can we help?" And what he had done was he expanded the identity of what we're protecting. Well, this is what I'm understanding from what you've talked about. I didn't think about it that way when he originally told me that story. And I'm wondering, is that the conversation that we need to have, looking at going, okay, you do have a need to protect, that's right, and you're protecting this group. But if we look at it from that perspective, your group is part of actually a bigger group, of people that we want to protect the whole lot of that. Is that the conversation that we need to have? Because this need to protect is going to stay, and it's as it should. That's part of being a person.
Absolutely. This idea, well, this is why men are built, and women too. Matter of fact, women have probably a greater protector identity within them, especially when it comes to their children.
Yeah, I've seen aliens. Vasquez is someone I wouldn't want to mess with.
Absolutely, right. And I'll tell you a quick story on that in a second. A story that my mentor told to basically sell the Marine Corps on his ethical ethical perspective, but more on that later. But yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah. The idea of diversity is good as long as that diversity does not become the value that you are protecting to the degree at the expense of other people. So you want to dig in to the deeper identity and connect with that. Yeah. And that's the idea of, like, even let's say in sales, right? When people build, you've heard the term building rapport. Yes. And a lot of times building rapport, people think, oh, it's asking questions and so forth. And it's like, and getting to know them. And that's correct. But the real idea of building rapport is finding connection. Yeah. You're asking questions and getting to know about the other individual so you can find the commonalities. And here's the one commonality we all have. We're all human beings. That's so, and human beings have pretty much the same needs. Yeah. Now they may culturally be a bit different. For instance, you and I everybody has the need for certainty. Yes. They want to feel certain about some things. Everyone wants to feel as if they are significant, in some way. And that's where the big tribal and group dynamics come into play with the significance. Yeah. Right. So it's like, well, I need to feel significant at your expense. Right. And that's
it's the key marketing tool is significance. That's why Prada bags are so, you pay a lot of money for them, or a Rolex watch. It makes people feel significant. It's a key market. Yeah.
Yeah, because we want to feel loved, and we want to feel respected, and we want to feel as if, we matter. And if
I love that, we matter. Yeah.
And it doesn't, that doesn't have to be at the expense of other people. So if you are very confident, it's like, of course you matter, right? Yeah. Even if I don't agree with you, you matter as a human being, and all those other things are details. Even some of these deeper issues, they're details.
Is that linked to liking yourself? When you say that, you have that confidence, is it an understanding that, hey, regardless of whatever level of skill you might have, separating your person from the behavior and just knowing no matter whatever it is, I like myself. And that way you'll feel confident in who you are as a person, recognize that your behaviors are slightly different and you might mess things up, and we'll talk about those later. But, is that a separation we need to do to feel confidence?
I would even go beyond that. Yeah. Because sometimes, let's face it, do you always like yourself?
Well, I do now, but I didn't always.
You do something knuckleheaded, right? You treat somebody crappy, you yell at your kids, you kick the dog. In that moment, you might not like yourself.
Well, that's where I'm separating, saying, do we need to separate the person from the behavior? Because I think in a lot of times we have good intention. We might do something stupid. So it's like, oh, I don't like that. I don't like that behavior. I'm a good person. In that moment, I had a good intention. Whatever it was, I just expressed it in a way that probably wasn't the best productively.
Absolutely, right? So you have to have, starting at a core level with yourself, you have to have respect for your own life value.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Absolutely, right? So you've got to be able to separate that value inside of yourself. You can call it, goes by many names, I suppose.
Mm.
But that life value that everybody has,
Yeah.
and even if you don't just like if I don't like the other person, okay, we're not going to like everything. Sometimes they're douchebags,
Yeah.
sometimes I'm a jerk.
Yeah.
I don't have to like you, but the respect for the value
Mm.
as a human being has got to still be there.
Yeah.
And that's, if you can get back to that, then now you're starting to start the process of being able to work out some bigger issues, bigger problems.
Yeah. Because I mean, we mentioned being a knucklehead, and you referenced that on your website and your LinkedIn and things like that. And you can share some of
Guilty
your
as
knucklehead
charged.
experiences. But this is where I want to come to, this whole separation of your own person and your behavior. I'll relay an experience of mine a long time ago. I was at a friend's wedding, and I was helping organize things at the start, and I was out the front, and there was the place where the limo was going to arrive with the bride to be. She was going to arrive in the limo, and the limo was going to park there, and she was going to get out. Now somebody parked there. Now they had no reason to know the limo was going to turn up there. There was no markings, no anything. But I've tomed over and go, "What the hell are you parking there for? Where's the bike going to park?" And I've just unloaded. This poor guy is like, so he's obviously, and because my intention was good. And I look at that and go, well, that was a really stupid behavior. I'm not berating myself or beating myself up personally. That was my experience there. Then that was my knowledge then. A lot of times we can be, but I was looking at going, well, there's two things out of that. One, my intention was good. I was trying to look after the bride. The way I did it was pretty poor. If I'm going to, can be clear, it was, knucklehead behavior.
Yeah.
And this is where it's like, so do we need to, separate that and go, and because I've treated my son as a bit of a social experiment where I've taught him to he hasn't, he's 14 now, but from an early age, I've always said, do you like yourself? Do you like yourself? And now, he just confidently goes through life. He's not really on social media or anything like that. He's not trying to impress people. He does well in school. He sorts himself out. And, he's not really, well, it helps that he's 6 foot as well, but he's not really bullied but he has stepped in where other people have been, in difficult situations, but he hasn't done it in a bullying way. He's done it in an appropriate way. And that's where I'm wondering, do we need to have this? And from my own experience too, I change and I go, well, I like myself. It was something that I repeated over and over again to now, if I mess up, I know I'm going to mess up. That's and if I do, and someone's upset by that, I'll apologize. Not from I'm a bad person, but hey, maybe I need to learn something. Do you think that kind of, we need to help people to recognize that inside they are a good person, like your grandmother said?
Absolutely. I mean, if you loathe yourself, it's going to be reflected outwardly in many ways, some very obvious ways and some maybe not so obvious ways. But in all your relationships, whether it's a micro relationship, you call it, you just meeting someone on the street, or it's an intimate relationship, you can't run from that. You have to be able to find the value. Because if you can't value even yourself, how could you ever value someone else?
Yes. Yeah.
It's going to be, there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. John Cartman, and Dr. Cartman came up with this, what's called the victim triangle. And the victim triangle, you got the little triangle there.
Yeah.
Got the person who is victimized. The person who is victimized or feel as if they've been victimized typically will turn into either or a rescuer, or the bully themselves, the persecutor.
Yes.
And they may mix or match those different identities in different relationships. And for instance, the rescuer identity may, by outwardly rationale, look like you're doing something, heroic. You're helping this person. Yeah. And not to say it couldn't be mutually exclusive, but really what happens is an unhealthy relationship, because the rescuer is rescuing that individual or that circumstance to replay these melodramas that they feel inside of themselves, and they're seeking significance and power. And then oftentimes, it goes awry, it goes badly, it goes poorly. They're trying to micromanage, or case in point today, right? You have all these virtue signalers out there. They want to look like they're doing the right things. And, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not, or being politically correct versus just being respectful to everybody.
Yeah.
Putting on a show, flying flags, putting on bumper stickers, putting a meme up on your Facebook. But in the meantime, you really have, you don't really exude that in a balanced way. Yeah. And so what happens then? Oh, now I start attacking the groups that aren't doing that.
Yeah.
Right. And I want you to see how good of a person I am, but it becomes very tribal very quickly, again, with the smaller groups and smaller factions, and very judgmental on the other person or the other group that they see as either being the opposition, or that they see the people not holding up their cause, or whatever it may be. So you can see if it's done in a balanced way, you would take that victim triangle and you have to shift it slightly. Yeah. So the rescuer becomes more of a coach, meaning they help, but not to ingratiate themselves.
Yeah.
You don't want to be an enabler, and the victim becomes the empowered individual. Yeah. So you can see that there's a slight shift of perspective and a slight shift in the feeling of it and the balance of it.
Yeah.
So it's not as, you're not replaying those same power dynamics inside of you, because most of the time, most of the people who hurt other people have been hurt.
Yes. Yeah.
It does not justify their behavior.
No.
But they're injured in some way.
Yeah, they haven't healed yet, and that's why they're enacting that. Yeah.
So they go after the power, or they go after, the victim. Right now in I don't know about over in Australia, but definitely in the United States, being a victim there's a lot of power in being a victim right now. So it's like,
there is certainly, and I think too, when you look at it, and I'm going to blame sales a little bit on that, because one key way it was taught in rapport was to listen to other people's problems and complain along with them, and you create rapport much quicker, allow people to complain and agree with it, and it's a very good way of immediately creating rapport with people.
Yeah, and if you take on that victim type of identity, it's very disempowering. The idea is, when you talk about policies and procedures and so forth, there are always people who need help with things. Talk about even in a society or as individuals.
Yeah.
But is the help that you're administering, is it going to help them to be independent, free thinking?
Teach them to fish.
Yes. Or are you making them dependent?
Yes.
And is the dynamic that you're trying to help them with, is it going to be a balanced power, not power at the expense of others?
Yeah.
And it's a tricky balance that I believe we are craving right now in our modern society with a lot of it, I think, has been opened up because of the internet. Now look at our conversation. You're on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
This is awesome. This is great that we're able to interact, where we never would have been able to before. And we have Facebook, where, I don't know about you, but on my Facebook, there's people from a bunch of countries and backgrounds and ethnicities and all this. So that part's good. But with it's almost like with the internet, you have this connective isolationism, right?
And that's part of coming to that. Sorry to interrupt there, but with that internet, I mean, the internet is good because it now allows us to connect. But as long as we're being authentic about it, as I mentioned before, I've traveled to at least 44 countries. I lost count, but I know it's 44 at least. And we talked about before how people innately have that same desire. We want to enjoy our life. We want good things for our kids. Those kind of things. A smile is a smile wherever you go across. But if you're projecting an inauthenticity, then you're not getting a full perception of what the greater world is like. And that's something that I think we need to promote more, and that's why, as I mentioned, I gave to the viewers, I gave Craig a warning that I don't really edit bleeps out and things like that. Where we mess up. That's life. We should be okay to do that. We should be okay with that attitude. So the internet's great in that it's opened up that. Can we come back? I just want to come back to this. You talked about before in dealing with conflict. You went out with the police and you were watching them, and you said when dealing with that physical conflict that was the issue, you then talk through this process of understanding addressing your own response to that first, and then being able to deal with that in a different way. Because I've noticed that there's a lot of training in that space about and de-escalating a situation without using force. Do you want to talk us through that process? Because that seems in life, that seems to be a great life skill. Because a lot of times you'll be in a situation, it could be even with a spouse or a partner, and they'll say something, you'll get agitated, then they get agitated back. But there's steps that you can do that de-escalate that. Do you want to talk us through that?
Sure. To kind of preempt that, a lot of times I think when people call for my services, they're afraid that, or there's a potentiality for physical violence. I don't do nearly as much work in the corporate arena, in the professional arena. Most of the times that I get hired, most of the people who come to my workshops and partake on our online courses and that are people in positions to where physical violence may occur.
Yeah.
Police obviously is one large one, but also like teachers is another, with kids fighting and having to break up fights and that type of thing, or security teams, whether it's church security or security and other avenues, or hospitals is another one to where there's more of a physical element to the conflict sometimes. So I do corporate stuff too, but not nearly as much as I do the interactions where they could get physically violent.
Yeah.
But regardless of that, and I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier in our conversation, I think everyone should have a semblance of martial arts training.
Yeah.
So they feel confident to physically that they can physically protect themselves.
Yes.
Because we are, again, human beings, which means we're mind, body, spirit.
Yeah.
And when you feel that confidence at a very, again, visceral and physical level, it changes the game totally for you.
Yes.
So even if you never have to use this skill that you developed, it builds this foundational confidence that is irreplaceable. But what happens, like, for instance, with the police officers that I was telling you about earlier, right? They would come to me with physical problems. Well, after doing ride-alongs with these guys and kind of observing and hanging out with them and seeing how some of them worked with the public, some of them worked with conflict very well. They could come into a stressful situation, and with their demeanor and their verbal capacity, they can, chill everybody out.
Yeah.
And then there's other guys that would come in and it would maybe be a little tense, and they would turn it into a barroom brawl.
Yeah.
Right? Through their egos or their lack of empathy or understanding, or some would just be jerks. Yeah. Throwing their power around and so forth.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing with that. And as you were talking about that, because, from that situation, that's the point I wanted to get to is how do you de-escalate that? Because I was thinking about my time in corporate recovery. I mean, I spent time in the military. I was posted to the SAS here, and so I dealt with that. Right. That was a completely different situation to the police officers, and we did work a lot with the police officers. But I was thinking from a corporate environment, when I worked in corporate recovery, that was taking over people's businesses. So I was walking into someone's company and saying, "You no longer control it anymore. We control it." And the business partner that I worked with, well, when I say partner, I wasn't in partnership with him. He was the boss of the firm, and he worked for one of the large, like an accounting partner sort of thing. That's the term they use for whoever's in charge. But there was a number of people that went into those situations that had been punched or whatever because they've walked in and created a situation and escalated it. Whereas the guy that I worked with, he spent 30 odd years, 35 years in that career, maybe it was 40, and never got to a situation where it escalated. He always managed it in a way where this is a very, very high conflict situation, but he managed to de-escalate it. And that's the part I wanted to explain, because there are ways of doing that. And it sounds like, can you expand on that from your experience of watching? What was the difference between the people that escalated it and the people that were able to walk in and create a calm situation?
Well, the first thing is what we were talking about earlier, right? That idea of ethics. It all starts with the ethic. And like you and I were talking about, not to get into a big philosophical conversation, but like we very plainly said, you have to have a love of yourself.
Yeah.
But not at the expense of other people, meaning like don't love yourself in a narcissistic way, or like you're the thing and everybody else everybody else sucks and you're the best.
That turns into a Hitler kind of complex. So
right. So that's bad. So and usually it's because you crave that idea of significance, right? Because you don't have it yourself, so you try to feed that, and it's exhausting. You can never fill it.
Yeah.
So it starts with that ethic of the sanctity of life and respecting life value from everybody and separating their behaviors from their value as a human being. So that's the beginning.
Yeah.
From there, you have to be very clear of what your objective is. So what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
And along with that objective is this. Is it most good, least harm for everyone? Now, most good, least harm in certain circumstances doesn't necessarily mean most good, no harm. Sometimes people need to be detained. Yeah. Sometimes people need to be fired, in the corporate world. Sometimes they need to be disciplined. Sometimes kids need to go to detention. Yeah. Sometimes if you're a police officer, some people need to be written up a ticket or some people need to be arrested. Yeah. And in certain circumstances, and you can, I think, identify with this with your military service, in certain circumstances, life has to be taken.
Yeah.
But it's a last resort, right? Each of those things are on a spectrum, last resort. Is what you're doing most good, least harm for everybody to the best of your ability and within the context of the situation.
I love that.
So that's next. So first is the ethics. Second is the clarity of your objective and your goal.
Yeah.
Next is your clarity of your communications. Right? Are you clearly communicating the boundaries, the deal breakers, and the way that this is going to work?
Yeah, I love that.
Because without clear communications, you could get off track very quickly.
Yeah.
And then you have to be able to listen. Because listening is going to help you do a lot of things.
It's amazing. I'm laughing because listening just keeps coming up and up and up. And I know, when I was younger, putting in my blockhead moves that we talked about before, listening was not high on my list of things that I did. So
listening is going to do a few things. Number one, listening is going to help to give you the details that you need to figure out the problem, whatever the problem is. Number two, listening is going to give you rapport, help you to achieve rapport.
Yeah.
Help you to extend respect and connection and empathy. And it's got to be in earnest, right? It can't just be lip service, so to speak. You can't just go through the motions or pretending to listen. You actually have to listen.
Yeah. And
not just with your ears.
Well, everything you do has to be authentic anyway. Otherwise, it's not going to be effective, regardless of what it is. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Right. So from that listening point, then you have to be able to ask the right questions, right?
Yeah.
And make suggestions on what you would like to have accomplished and done.
Okay, because that's an interesting point there where you say make suggestions. You didn't say make demands, or you didn't, there's that was very clear in this process you've gone through. It wasn't going in there and demanding a situation. So
yeah, the idea of a lot of people when I teach leadership and conflict management, a lot of people get confused. A lot of people believe, oh, so you're teaching conflict communication skills. Great. So you're going to tell me how I can tell someone else to do what I want. No, it's really not that.
Yeah.
It's being able to kind of set up this structure to do two things. Number one is to gain influence. And one and two isn't necessarily in this order. Influence isn't demands necessarily. Now, I could use making a demand as influence, and I'm not saying that we never do that, because we do, but it's further on the spectrum.
But as you said gain influence, not enforce your opinion.
Correct. Yeah, gain influence. So, and we gain influence in a lot of different ways, right? Through our presence, we gain influence, which goes back to the physical portion of the training.
Because I would imagine, like from your perspective with your training, and I'm relating this to myself as well, it would be very difficult in any situation for you to be in a conflict situation just because of the way you approach that. And I'm again relaying it back to the partner of the corporate recovery framework. It was very difficult for him to be in a conflict situation because of his presence and how he dealt with things. Is that fair to say from your perspective? There's so many different options you have.
Absolutely, right. So if you're dialed in on your ethic and you have the some of these other skills and you're good at them, what you're really doing is, which brings us to the second thing. So one is influence.
Yeah.
And the second thing is I'm determining what state the other person or group of people are in. Are they, and you don't have to overcomplicate it, are they open to reconciliation and to suggestions and so forth? Are they closed to reconciliation and different options? Or are they determined to get whatever it is they want at almost any expense, including yours? So are they open, closed, or determined? So that's the other thing of the whole process, like that we teach. There's a whole rundown that we teach that will help people to determine the state of the other party or the other group or the other person. So then, which brings us to another aspect of that, right? That influence portion of it. There's big persuasion sequences that I could take you through and all that, but not on this podcast. But the influence really is not about trying to make you do anything. It's trying to be clear on my ethics, be clear on my idea of listening to what you need and what's going on with you, having a clear objective, giving good options, and having a plan B if things go south. It's not what am I going to make you do. It's can I be persuasive with the way that I set up the options and listen and try to figure this problem out? And what am I going to do if you're not going to come around to the boundaries, or we can come to some type of mutual agreement? What am I going to do? What's my exit strategy? Not forcing you to do something, but what am I going to do if you do something?
So go ahead.
I was going to say, and that when it comes to so we're talking a lot of verbal and kind of emotional, verbal, psychological things here. Yeah. The one element I want to kind of pull out of left field, which is a very important element, is the potentiality for the physicality of a circumstance. So we call it an ACT violation, ACT, A-C-T. Yeah. ACT is someone is attacked.
Yeah.
C is there's continued non-compliance in some way, or argument, continuing arguing or continuing non-compliance, you're not communicating. And then the third thing is a task of greater importance comes up.
Yeah.
Maybe this has happened to you or some of your listeners out there, but let's say you're trying to get to work and you're running a little late. So maybe you're going a little few miles an hour or kilometers per hour over the or kilometers per hour over the speed limit.
We're
right?
metric here. I know we don't fit in. So we fit in with the rest of the world, just not with you guys.
Right, exactly, right? So then you get pulled over because you're going too fast.
Yeah.
And the police officer comes to your car and asks you for your ID and registration and all that. They're ready to slap a ticket on your happy rear end, and they get a call that there's an accident, a really bad accident down the road, and they say, "Listen, it's your lucky day. I got to go attend to this accident, so you're off the hook.
Yeah,
slow it down." So a task of greater importance came about to where they had to attend to that, so they had to break free from what they were doing. So an act violation is anywhere within this context of us communicating. If there is if one of these things occur, right? If I'm starting to get attacked, if we're just, there's a continued non-communications, or there's a task of greater importance comes up, I know words alone aren't going to solve this problem anymore.
Yeah.
So I may have to do something else, which doesn't necessarily mean punch the guy in the face, right? It could be leave. It could be call for backup. It could be ask for assistance. It could be a lot of different things, but some action is required that's going to be beyond just verbally communicating.
What I took away from that, well, one thing I wanted to explore further with that is, and we're coming back to this visceral reaction, because in any conflict situation, you mentioned before, we have this need to protect. Well, before we get to that, we have I want to say conflict situation, this need to protect, whether it's ourselves, our tribe, our identity. There's that visceral reaction, and what if we are attacked, and then if we get, or if someone is then doing that and you attack back, that's going to trigger that reaction further. But what you're talking about is tapping into this core. I'm going to use the word biology maybe incorrectly. English is my second language, and it's my only language.
You're Australian.
I mess it up a lot. So English, I was anyway. But that's what I'm getting at. So if we're in this situation, we want to de-escalate. If we're presented with a conflict situation, and we react in a conflict way, that person really has no choice, to a degree, because if they're starting from conflict situation, they're probably not operating from the front of their brain. They're operating from the core parts, and they're not really thinking about it. Right. So it becomes, if you attack back, that fight, flight, or freeze kicks in, and if they're already attacking, it's probably more likely it's going to be a fight response. Whereas taking the process of what you're talking about, you're not actually adding more fuel to the fire. You're stepping back and going, okay, let's create a bit of space, emotional space, to explore what's happening here. So you're allowing them to come down from that aggressive stance, giving them an out from that. That sounds like that process. That visceral response is all of a sudden not so threatening. You're not so threatening to be an attack. Am I understanding that correctly through that process?
You are absolutely right. So it's doing a few things, right? It's bringing that situation down to the level to where you're getting out of your reptilian brain, so to speak, and more into your frontal cortex, to where you can actually have a conversation, right? Where it's not so emotionally driven. It's now you're getting back into your logical brain, to where you can start to think and respond in a different manner. And the other thing that it's doing, and I said this a little bit earlier too, it's helping you to assess and determine what state the other person is in. So if they're in an emotional state to where they're overwhelmed and possibly violent and argumentative, if we can't get out of that state, the likelihood of you influencing them is going to be diminished.
Yeah, because you're not operating from that primal brain. That there's very little. Blinkers are really on. Yeah, it's very binary, so to speak. It's either black or white. It's fight or freeze or
flee. It's argue or not. It's me win or you lose. It's not, there's very little in the middle.
Yeah.
And in order for us to come to an assessment and a conclusion, if they stay or if you're in that state too, guess what? It gets ugly quick, as you well.
Well, that's part of that development, isn't it? And because you mentioned here with that, and I want to take that back to what you mentioned earlier, which I read into. If I'm looking at notes here, I've written down higher set of principles that you operate for. That you mentioned a sanctity of life, and it seems to have this higher set of principles. Do you think today, there's a lot of out there about what you can't do. You can't do this. You can't do that. But it doesn't seem to me to be a lot of what is these higher set of principles, because I looked at that and was looking at how that works, and from Share.care's perspective, we went away and we actually pulled out the medieval Knights Code and rewrote that and said, well, actually, here's a guiding set of principles. It's like, and I deal with a lot of corporate stuff as well. And it's like, just because a contract says that you can do this doesn't mean that that's the right thing to do if you're operating from a higher set of principles. So what we wanted to do was create this thing where we're giving a higher set of principles, which we wrote out, and that's on the Share.care website. Do you think we need more of that? We need to have, okay, this is a higher set of principles that we operate as people. This is what we do, almost like even the Ten Commandments. If you're from a religious background, that there was this higher set of principles that you abided by. Do we need more of that, do you think? And what do you think some of those key principles would be?
Well, yes. Now it gets tricky, and here's the tricky part. It's simple and not easy. The tricky part is laws and policies are the outside coming in, right? To make you do things. The ethics that we're talking about are the inside coming out.
Yes. Yeah.
So having more laws and more rules and more principles sometimes have a counter effect on things. Yeah. But I like where you're going with it, and I understand where you're going with it. I think rather than the idea of laws and policies and so forth, I think the fundamental principles that we can align with, because we feel them, right? We can feel them inside of us.
Yes.
And then what happens is if they're adverse in some way, we will tell stories to kind of get around that ill feeling that you get, right? We'll tell ourselves stories. We'll ramp up the ugliness of the opposition and ramp up our own, ingratiate ourselves and our groups bigger.
Yeah.
To believe that story that you're telling yourself. And it's very simply this, is that sanctity of life is for everybody, not just you and the people in your group and the people that you love and the people who look like you and believe like you and like the same color ice cream as you do and the same music and all this, but everybody.
Yeah.
Now, here it's not cultural relativism either, right? Everything is not equal in that regards. The equal part is that we're all human beings and we all deserve the equal amount of rights and respect and so forth as a human being. And I think, and I can't quote it, so I won't even try to slaughter it, but like it or like the organization or not, but the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Yes.
I think tells that story pretty well.
Yeah, I've read that, and it's very, very good principles in there, definitely.
So this idea that we're all human and we all are with that value as a human being, that's equal. That's what's equal. Some people are bald, some people have hair, some people are tall, they're short. Some people have a lot of money and some people have no money, right? Life isn't fair in that way. Right? Life is not equal in that way. How it is equal is that we all have this equality of human life. That's where it starts. And then we have to be able to distinguish and separate and differentiate that life value from the behaviors. Like, okay, your life value is the same, but that behavior is not acceptable. And we all do it, like with your kids, right?
Yeah.
You love, what's your son's name?
Benjamin.
So you love Benjamin.
Hmm.
My guess is Benjamin, maybe not anymore, probably, but maybe not. Maybe when he was a little younger. There's times you probably wanted to kill him, right? There's probably times where you wanted to, you had to discipline him. You did
And
some
yeah,
knuckleheaded stuff.
because it was funny. I'm probably one of the rare parents that I've never actually yelled at Benjamin ever.
That's good.
Know,
Unless you're suppressing all that.
yeah, no, but it became, but it was more a process that I went through from a very early age. Went through that process of what you're talking about in those
Yes.
steps. Those six steps. It wasn't demanding. It was I noticed he wasn't initially the school, and at a young age he just really wasn't into school. And I asked him. I said, do you know why you're going to school? It wasn't you must study. It was like, do you know why you're going to school? And he goes, I don't know. Because it was like no one had told him. So I explained, do you see what I do? Earning money, and so we can do these things and go on, these great trips and have all this fun and buy you lots of toys. I can do that because I'm educated. And I talked him through that process, and I saw the light bulb go off in his head. And from there, I noticed, it wasn't immediate. And like a massive change, but there was a progressive change where he progressively did that. But it was the process of. That's why I really wanted to explore that point where you went with the police officers and said, okay, when dealing with conflict, we're dealing with these difficult situations. It's firstly how you react to it is the primary thing, and that gives you more options to deal with and avoid that conflict situation. Maybe he's only 14 yet; he's still got a chance to play up and drive me nuts. So we'll see what happens.
He still has time, yeah. but my point in that too is, it sounds like you've dealt with some of the situations really well. But I guess my greater point to that is that you can separate his actions from his value as a human being.
Yeah,
there's nothing that young man is going to do that's going to allow you to not see his value as a human, right?
Correct. We had that laugh, and I've some of the listeners have heard this story before. But when we're watching the movie June, we laughed out loud because there's a scene where you've got the young guy and the king, and whether the young guy's going to take over or not. And the father turns to the son and says, "Look, what you do is entirely up to you." I'm paraphrasing, but it doesn't matter to me. You're already everything that you ever need to be for me. You're my son, and that's all you need to be. And we laugh because I've been telling Benjamin that for years. It was like, whatever you do, I'll love you. You're my son. That's everything. If you cock up monumentally, I'm going to say, hey, that's probably not appropriate. I'm not going to certainly defend you in a situation where you've done something deliberate. But I got that from my parents as well. It's like, you do something wrong, we'll report you to the police. And it's like,
right. And I'll come and visit you in prison, but I'll still love you.
Yeah, correct. So, and it was separating the behavior from the person. So, and that's, I think that gives you a lot of power too, when I say power, to address the situation.
Well, and the power to live a better life, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the power to not suffer from the things that people who hate suffer from, including PTSD.
Yeah.
Right. Including PTSD.
Because you deal with that. I mean, I personally, and that's a story for another time, but from my experience in the military, there's stuff that I dealt with. When you're dealing with people that have died next to you, it's traumatic. And you need to address that. And that's maybe a whole nother topic we could sort of talk on about. I'm sure you deal with about men and expressing emotions and asking for help.
Absolutely.
That's a place of strength. That's not a place of weakness.
Right. It is. Yeah. So this is all tied in together. And that idea of, like what we were talking about earlier about loving yourself, and it's not about the actions. It's about loving that core part of you that is our true essence, and you can call it the soul, you can call it the spirit, whatever you want to call it. But that life value that you have, and being able to separate the actions and behaviors and appropriately deal with those, if you have to, while still showing respect and loving the individual for the individual. Now, you can do it, and most people can do it for their family, some people with their friends. We just have to take, simple but not easy, we have to take that same ethic and objective and spread it to everybody.
Yeah. And is that part of, and we'll get into the things that you're doing. I mean, you've got PeaceWalker. Is that part of what PeaceWalker is, being a protector of life, of wider life?
Yes.
Do you want to tell us about PeaceWalker and some of the other things that you're doing?
Yeah, PeaceWalker is an initiative that really is near and dear to my heart, and it's been my life's work. It's the idea of how to address the challenges and the conflicts inside of us and around us more effectively. So living a more empowered life, but doing it in a very practical way as well. So there are courses that I teach, and we have an online resource and live courses and hybrid and all that kind of stuff. But it's a blueprint and a framework for leadership, conflict management, personal development, and personal protection, because those things are all intertwined. So there's the course that we run people through. There's like a core course that goes into more detail and depth to what our conversation is here about how to actually do that stuff, how to really implement that. And first you have to see the blueprint, and then how do you start using that blueprint in real time under real circumstances to be a better leader, a better protector, deal with conflict more effectively inside of you, but also around you. How do you speak and communicate more effectively? How do you see the problem more effectively, and how do you deal with that? So
that's both. You've got that in person and online, don't you? Do you want to give
yes.
the website for that as well?
Yeah, you go to PeaceWalker.net.
Beautiful. And so, what are the different programs on there that people find at that website? Because you said because they can. You don't just have to be in person with yours. You can. There's a personal component, but if I noticed correctly, there's an online component as well. So someone can actually. So do you want to talk us through both of those? Because some of the listeners are international. So do you want to talk us through?
Yeah, there's we have a whole online community and learning process that you can gain access to the entire course that's online. If you go to PeaceWalker.net, the membership opens and closes right now. I believe it's open, but at the time that your listeners are actually listening to this, it may or may not be open. But if it's not, you can drop in your email and you can get on the waiting list. But a good place to start really is I've got a introductory course that's free. And actually, if they just email me, I can send them the link to that. If you email peacewalkerlife@gmail.com, I'll send them the link to it. It's a free home study course. It's made up of a handful of very short videos that one will give a concept, and then the other will give a physical defensive tactic. And it'll get them going on the path. And then if they want more, they can get into the whole site and whole community and get to the whole program. And then, maybe if they want to get really intrepid and come out to one of our retreats, maybe we'll do one in Australia someday. But right now,
I'd love to do that. That'd be awesome.
Right now,
tell us a bit about what happens on the retreats.
So the retreat, it's a hybrid program. It's 5 weeks online to prepare you for the 3.5-day in-person experience.
Yeah.
So the 5 week
sounds
online,
like there's a bit of preparation work. So it sounds pretty intense.
Oh, there is. So the 5 week online, the first week, you got your orientation and then building your foundation. So unshakable foundation, right? And then the next week is about the engagement. So how do you engage? And then how do you influence? And how do you, gain that action? So each week is a different theme, and it's a very manageable course. It's about 20 minutes a day for 5 days a week. And then once a week, we go on a Zoom call to answer questions and so forth. So it prepares you for the in-person experience. So what happens in the in-person experience it gives you the whole PeaceWalker framework of dealing with conflict inside of and around you, starting with the ethic and ending with the physical. Yeah. And then when we get together live in person, it's an outdoor retreat center up here in Michigan. It's right on the Piramarquette River. Beautiful facility. Everything's included. So we have cookouts together, campfires together, the warrior circle and the talks. We do a quick review of everything, and then it's all adventure activities that all the stuff is tied into scenario training to go through scenarios to then adapt all those tools that you learned over the 5 weeks to
Yeah.
actually implement them in your life. And then we get into each of the individual, because the retreats are fairly small, maximum of 25 people, usually about a dozen people. So it's a lot of one-on-one connection, and we hang out for the entire long weekend together, morning to night. And we do not quite as intense as probably some of your military stuff, but we do a lot of cool stuff that's physical, but it's something that everybody can do, right? It's not just about being a martial artist or anything like that. It's practical skills that I guarantee you will use every single day, and then some skills that hopefully you never have to use.
That's fabulous, because I think one of those things is, and you mentioned before about, this, coming back to what you said about doing martial arts and giving that confidence, because there is something about getting out there and actually doing that experience that gives you that knowing of power. Like, I know there's a number of people. I years ago I did a number of seminars where they did the fire walk, and you had to walk. And
Tony Robbins, man.
Yeah. So I didn't do the Tony Robbins fire walk, but I've done a number of which they're probably copying Tony. But that firework bit, it's an awakening when you go through that experience to go, oh, I can do that. There was one where we, on the father-son camp that we had as part of, because they had a yearly father-son camp, and one of them was you climbed up this, it was a 10-meter pole or 30-foot pole. We've got to convert here. And
thank you.
So you'd climb to the pole with this. You'd have to then get on a platform, and you were strapped on, so you had a harness on you. But then you had to jump off.
Oh, nice.
And even though you've got a harness on you and know that you're protected, that's quite
you're still pooping your pants. Yeah, absolutely, because it's scary.
And the other was, there was this ball that you had to try and hit, and if you could headbutt it, you got extra points, sort of thing.
Nice.
But what you were talking about is, it sounds like those retreats give you people the opportunity to explore these physical things that they may not have done to test and go, hey, actually, I can do with that, and therefore understand that in a conflict situation, hey, I can deal with that. Is that the principle you're getting to?
Absolutely. That's part of it. Another part there's two other elements to it. One other element to it is, being that we only have a certain amount of time together, and it's a workshop type of an atmosphere. Yeah. You need to have an experience if you're going to make that shift. If you're going to evolve in that way, you have to have an experience. It's not just the knowledge. If it was just the knowledge, or just the information, I should say, you wouldn't have to leave your computer. Yeah. If it was only about the information, everybody would be thin, everybody would be fit and in shape, and everybody would be rich.
You've actually got to do something,
right? Yeah. Most people aren't any of those things. So it's not just about the information. It's about that evolution that we make inside of us. It's about that shift that we make. So we need to have an experience in order to do that. And I can't, I've been training my whole life. I'm 52. I've been training since I was 6. Do the math. I've been training 40 some odd years. A lot of different experiences in real life with conflict and violence and so forth. I can't do that for you, or like your experience in the military with being, SAS and that type of thing. If they didn't do it, they didn't do it. Yeah. So what can we do to help supercharge that time together? And it's not just more information, it's really having an experience. And that's why the retreat is so important. And then the third component of that is the idea of shared adversity. So we come together as people if we share adversity, as long as we're on the same page, right? Yeah. If we're on the same page, that shared adversity, just like those connections that you made in the military. You're in the trenches with that partner of yours. After you're done, you have a deeper bond and connection.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. I love that. Is there any other contacts? I mean, we'll have all this in the show notes, but is there any other services and things like that you'd like to share with the audience before we?
No, not really. Just
the PeaceWalker website is pretty impressive. I love, and I love the mission that you're trying to do is be a protector of life, protect that sanctity of life.
Be a protector of life, be a force for good. Be that lifeguard. Learn how to swim, and when I say swim, I mean learn how to deal with conflict and violence and all that. But be a lifeguard.
Yeah. Before we wind up, if you were to the key takeaways or key wisdom or wisdoms, your choice, what would it be? What would you want the audience to take away? What would you want them? Yeah, what would be your key takeaways?
I will end with this. One of my mentors, friends, teachers, his name is Jack Hoban. And Jack's a former Marine. Mm-hmm. I guess there are no former Marines. He's a Marine. Good point. And he had a mentor by the name of Dr. Robert Humphrey. And much of the stuff we talked about today is influenced by those two gentlemen. Dr. Humphrey was a rifle platoon commander on Iwo Jima in World War II.
Yeah.
And some of you folks maybe know that picture of the Marines hoisting the American flag up on Mount Suribachi.
Yeah.
Well, Humphrey's unit was protecting that perimeter when that picture was taken.
Yeah.
And he was the 4th Rifle Platoon commander of that platoon because the other 3 got shot and killed. Started off the platoon about 40 guys. I believe at the end there were about 9.
Yeah.
So after the war was done, he kind of wanted to get to the bottom of why people were hell-bent on killing themselves, in war and so forth. So he got a Harvard law degree. Didn't really answer his questions. Yes. So he ended up going back to the school, to the Fletcher School of Diplomacy, and got his JD, kind of the equivalent of a PhD, in cross-cultural conflict management.
Yeah. And
he ended up working for the State Department for 35 some odd years, helping the U.S. military installations. This is during the Cold War period, right? Help those military installations get along better with the indigenous people that the countries that they were in. And he lived by this creed he called the Warrior's Creed. You could also call it the Protector's Creed. So Jack shared it with me, and I wanted to share it with you guys. Yeah. So this is it. Wherever you go, everyone is a little bit safer because you're there. Wherever you are, anyone in need has a friend. And whenever you go home, people are glad that you're there. He thought it was a better life, and that's what I've experienced as well. So I really appreciate you having me on your show. And if there's anything I can do to help you or help any of your listeners, just get a hold of me. You got my email address, which is peacewalkerlife@gmail.com. And I can get you that free home study course, or if there's any questions or anything that you have.
Awesome, Craig. I love that. Wherever you go, leave it a better place. In summary, I'm going to go back and rewrite that out. I was listening intently, so now I need to go back and that's beautiful. I really love that, Craig. It's been such a wonderful experience having you on the show. I love it so much. I'd love to have further chats in the future if you're up for that. And thank you very much.
Love to have further chats, and thank you for the opportunity of talking with you. I had a wonderful time conversing, and hopefully that your listeners got a lot out of it as well.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes. For others, and for you.